What's fascinating about the data center business is it's so multidisciplinary. If you work in data center, you need to understand anything from real estate and energy to uh, power and cooling and networks and software and hardware. You need to understand things like controls and fire protection and also constructions and testing and commissioning. So there are so many facets to this industry, and facing the customers. The most important thing, in my opinion, is
It's Joshua Feinberg here from the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. And I'm welcoming a very special guest here with me today. I'm welcoming Peter Gross from PMG Associates Consulting and Advisory. Thrilled to have you with us today. I think with a place I usually like to start is for those people in the data center industry, the very small sliver in the data center industry that haven't yet heard of Peter Gross. Can you introduce our audience to who you are, what kinds of companies you work with, and how you got to where you are today in your career?
Sure. First, thank you for having me, Josh. Good to see you. My story is pretty trivial, nothing really spectacular here. I spent my entire career working in digital infrastructure, and very passionate about this. I'm an electrical engineer by training. Started designing power systems that include the UPS system that introduced me to data centers, and I had a very interesting journey through this business. I started in the early days of data centers, where designing a data center was almost black magic. I worked for the big banks and financial institutions, mostly in New York, supporting their IT needs, anywhere from New York Stock Exchange to Merrill Lynch and many others. It was an interesting time when data centers were extremely important for these businesses, and reliability was more important than anything else. The business had evolved, and then I got into the whole craziness of the .com business. By that time, I started my own company. I was one of the co-founders of EYP Mission Critical. The company was dedicated to designing and operating data centers around the world. It grew to be pretty large. Probably it was in the first decade of this century was probably the largest consulting, engineering, design firms dedicated to digital infrastructure, and that led to acquisition of my company by HP. I spent about 40 years as the managing partner of the consulting business at HP, primarily focusing on data centers, but also energy and sustainability. I retired. I did retire for almost 2 weeks, and I couldn't quite take it. And I joined a company called Blue Energy, where I run a business unit that focused on bringing solid oxide fuel cells to data centers, and we're quite successful. And especially in today's environment, where power is becoming so important, and utility can fulfill the needs of these massive data centers, where distributed generation, including fuel cells, are so important. And for the last 4-5 years, I've been a consultant. I'm an advisor to a lot of companies. I sit on a number of boards. But I'm primarily, pretty much everything I do has to do with digital infrastructure and data centers in particular. Involves a lot of startups, and passionate about innovation and understanding what's the next big thing in this industry.
You're too modest. Some congratulations are definitely in order. I saw just a few weeks before we're recording this podcast that AFCOM Data Center World just presented you with the Lifetime Achievement Award. So congratulations.
Thank you. That was very nice on their part.
So thinking back with all of this, Peter, what advice would you give to someone who is just starting out in the data center industry, that's working in a customer-facing role in either marketing or sales or account management, customer success, or product strategy or channel partnerships? What advice would you give them to help set their career up for success in the data center industry?
It's a very interesting question. My advice would be to be curious and look around. What's fascinating about the data center business is it's so multidisciplinary. If you work in data center, you need to understand anything from real estate and energy to power and cooling and networks and software and hardware. You need to understand things like controls and fire protection and also constructions and testing and commissioning. So there are so many facets to this industry, and facing up customers. The most important thing, in my opinion, is to show a broad knowledge of the business, because pretty much every component here is important in delivering the right message about the product, about the attributes of the data centers. The problem in this industry, this problem has been very apparent for a long time, is the fact that there is no real way for a student, in an undergraduate or even a graduate student, to really understand what this business around. There are very few outlets that will educate people that are entering in this industry. Obviously, the most glaring exception is SMU, that offers a engineering program, including a master's degree in data centers. But in general, most people have a difficult time understanding the connections between their iPhone and the source of information. They don't realize that every single piece of information that comes to your computer or your iPad or iPhone has to travel to a data center, which is this massive concentration of hardware and software, and all this information is stored and distributed from. So my advice would be to find a way to learn more about this industry, learn more about what makes one product, one type of data center different than the others. Understand the evolution from conventional and enterprise data centers to colocation, to cloud, to AI, and then to quantum computing and so on. For me, it's a most interesting thing in the world, but only spending some time and really trying to learn about it, you gain the same level of interest and excitement as I experienced.
Yeah, that's super fascinating. And you're right, is that there's definitely, I've seen in the last couple of years, there's some good grassroots movements going on now to try to get high school students and college students excited about careers in the data center industry. But that's only in the very recent last couple of years. And there's definitely some precedent, like Apple historically has done well in K-12. CompTIA has done some interesting things in high schools and college. But yeah, there's a lot of room for improvement for getting the word out about the nature of these careers. And you're right, it's so multidisciplined. When I first came to the space, coming from an IT support managed services perspective, I thought I understood it until I started to realize that no, only co-location is only one piece of the industry. And then there's wholesale and hyperscale and all the technology companies and all the facilities companies. And there's a whole separate ecosystem for construction and real estate and all the financing that makes this stuff possible.
Right.
Given all of that, so that's great advice for someone that's just starting out. What about someone that may be mid-career that you've known for 10 years or more, and they bump into you at a conference and they feel a little bit burned out? They're trying to figure out what their next move should be to get their career back on track. What advice would you have to someone in that situation?
Well, it depends, obviously, on many factors. But I think the most important thing for anybody who is growing in this industry is the most important thing is to be curious, to and stay relevant. If you look at the journey, the evolution of this industry, especially in the last 5, maybe 10 years, the changes were so dramatic. The dynamics of the evolution of the data center was so interesting, and to a certain degree, almost unpredictable. Finding ways to understand where the business is going, where the industry is going, trying to learn about the changes that are occurring at every level. It's could be design, could be architecture, could be new types of application, workload, software. It's a continuously changing environment, and only people that are staying current and are learning, are curious about this change will, in my opinion, will succeed. The problem is, and that applies to any profession, any discipline, any type of industry. A lot of people are comfortable in their environment, are comfortable with what they do. They have done certain things very well for a number of years, and they are not all that willing, all that keen on learning or changing their routines, and that's not going to work in this business, because, as I said, if you look at a year and a half ago, nobody talked about or nobody really knew what AI is or what it's going to do. And the whole thing exploded in the last 12 months. And now it's a totally new ballgame. It's a new industry. And the changes AI will bring at every level, understanding the dynamics of GPU evolution and how fast that changes. And with every new announcement from NVIDIA, everything changes. Whether it's the size of the data center, whether it's the cooling, the type of cooling, whether the type of power distribution, or understanding the new power profiles, understanding the implication on distributing power at 100 kilowatts per cabinet. All these things are so different than the way people operate, design, and constructed data centers 5 years ago, or even 3 years ago. So my advice, if I'm not qualified to give any advice to anybody, but if I were to advise anybody, it's and say, just look at where the puck is going, as Wayne Gretzky used to say. Just look at the next big thing, because that's gonna shape your career.
It's interesting. When I used to have conversations with people about AI 5 or 6 years ago, because some SaaS companies were even a few years earlier than Sam Altman on this, a lot of people didn't realize that Google Maps and Waze and Amazon and Netflix, so many tools that they were already using, the credit card company detecting anomalies, were already using this to a certain degree. But yeah, it was the Chat GPT and Sam Altman, OpenAI, that really brought it into mainstream adoption. So yeah, it's super interesting to think about the need to keep your skills sharp. The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com. When you look at the industry big picture and you see other peers like yourself, do you notice anything that you look at others doing and you would want to point them in a different direction, where you feel there's a mistake they're making, where they haven't thought something through, where there's just a best practice that isn't quite there yet?
Yeah, indeed. Just like I said before, doing things the same way you did most of your career could be could lead to significant shortcomings and even mistakes. It's learning and trying new things. I think that for someone that wants to grow and evolve in this business, it's important to, as I said, to be relevant, to read about this, ideally write about your experiences and the way you things evolving, attend conferences and other events, meet new people, meet new companies. Look at if you look at the kind of innovations that is flourishing in this industry today. There are so many companies, so many startups that address the most pressing issues we're seeing today, having to do with sustainability, carbon reduction, new sources of energy, new sources of storage, new type of on-site generations, new kinds of new solutions and technologies for power distributions. All the new technologies having to do with cooling, whether it's immersion cooling or direct-to-chip cooling. All these things are, well, first of all, are very interesting and fascinating, but sometimes could be a little bit overwhelming. You have a job, you have to do all these things on your daily routines, but and might spending more time at night or in your spare time reading and educating yourself and understanding all these changes might be a little challenging. But I think that it's for someone that wants to revitalize their career, or maybe even move in a different direction, reboot or pivot. I think that learning and being current and being proactive is the key.
Peter, when you think about the startups that you come across that are embracing new forms of technology, cooling, scalability, AI, density, is there any one area that you think is so exciting that you're going to look back 2 years from now and realize that something that was just the beginning of an idea right now ended up being huge, driving the industry forward?
Well, the industry is now at clearly inflection point. It has never seen anything that comes close to the level of growth and the kind of changes we are seeing today. It's clearly a unique time in our industry. It's never been like this, and I doubt that it will ever occur again. So this period, probably the next 5 years or so, we're going to see an unprecedented growth. The projection is that the next 40 years, there are going to be more data centers being built in this world than everything that has been built since the 80s or so. The industry will spend over $1 trillion in the next 4 or 5 years. Just in this country, we're going to probably build anywhere from 17 to 25 gigawatts worth of data centers. So each period has its own priorities or shortages. Right now, it's the big thing is power, right? Everybody is trying to identify a location that has power. Ideally, that has power that it's relatively low cost power that has some. It's either green or have some green component, and the world is running short of power. You look at what's happening in this country with not only the data centers but also the EV charging stations and all the manufacturing industries moving back here. The demand and stress on the utility is tremendous. So a lot of the innovation today, a lot of the new things being done today have to do with addressing this issue. It's so pressing. As I said, new source of power, ways to address, find other sources like hydrogen or leveraging all the renewable energy we have, using energy storage and so on. I mean, there are many elements here that are probably of great interest today, but in the long run, the business is a lot more complex and involves a lot more than these immediate needs. And what's next? Quantum computing. What is that going to do? And it's going to also turn this whole industry upside down. The look of the data center is going to be fundamentally different. It's very difficult to predict how things will evolve. But the one thing is certain: the industry will grow at an unprecedented pace, at least for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how all of the power constraints shake out over the next couple of years and how they're ultimately solved. And I keep hearing that even the demand for EVs, for electric cars, is going to be on a collision course with the demand for grid power for data centers. So certainly a lot of incentives, a lot of demand to figure this out.
Yeah, right. And that's why one of the things that fascinates me is the whole energy storage domain, which has marginal impact on the data centers, although they are very important. But I believe that energy storage has a fundamental contribution to the whole decarbonization of the world, and primarily is driven by the EV industry, right? The electric vehicle industry, but the impact is much broader in terms of both in terms of data center and the storage there, and interaction with the grid, but also if you look at the ability to improve the behavior of the grid, responding to these demands, and also the instability created by these large chunks of renewable that are coming in or getting out of the grid. All these things make and that's one, as I said, one element of all the interesting things happening in this industry.
Well, Peter, this has been fascinating, super insightful to get your perspective to pass along to people that are new to the industry, people that are mid-career, people that are trying to figure out what the impact of AI is going to be, and the cooling constraints and power constraints, and how the industry is going to address them. Peter, what's the best way for someone to follow what you're up to, reach out to you if they have any questions? I know, is LinkedIn the best place?
Yeah, LinkedIn is a great place, and I'm always interested in helping young people that are starting in this industry. I try mentoring people. I don't know how successful I am or how good I am, but it gives me a great pleasure and satisfaction to see that I could help a young person move, evolve, and flourish in this industry.
Well, thank you so much, Peter. One more quick question. Do you have any favorites, podcasts or YouTube or anyone that's doing media in this space that you think I should interview next?
Yeah. I have a long list. I have, there are so many brilliant minds in this industry, and a lot of them have such an enormous impact on my career. I think that there are a lot of interesting people. I would consider Mark Keeley, extraordinary evolution he went through in this business. Christian Baladi, who ran the data center business at Microsoft. Joe Cava, who was in the middle of the whole AI industry evolution. These are just three names, but I'm sure I can give you another 100 names or so. People really interesting.
Yeah, so this has been terrific. I was really excited about the chance to get to interview you for our podcast. I really appreciate you sharing all your wisdom. I've been speaking today with Peter Gross, based out of LA, PMG, Associates Consulting and Advisory. Thanks again, Peter. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Very, very nice. Very good talking to you, Josh. Thank you.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.